Please stand by as we get ready to launch another episode of this reality radio CafeCast with your host and my husband, Denny J, K5DCC.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition, liftoff.
Now grab your glass and get ready to fill it up with some radio on the rocks.
Vehicles pitching downrange.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Digicom Cafe, located in the beautiful Ozarks of Northwest Arkansas. My name is Denny J, and we are here with a very interesting guest, Jean Portune, as he told me in our audio cafe cast this morning, kind of a French background.
I said very French.
Very French, very good. We have a few that have dropped in without audio and video, so I see we've got 4 participants here. Welcome. And we'll open it up later on after John's presentation with his PowerPoint, and he'll be free to take some questions again. And I would encourage you all to subscribe to my channel. Just look for Digicom Cafe on YouTube, or you can just go to youtube.dennyj.com, and that will take you right to the subscribe button. The more people that subscribe, the closer I can get to 1,000, which means then I can do some extra marketing and actually make a little money to help pay for some of my expenses in running the cafe. But we are thrilled to have John Portune here. W6NBC. I was blessed to have him as a guest on our audio cafe cast, which we try and have every day. And it was very fascinating. It really stimulated my thoughts on things that I could do with a slot antenna. John is the resident expert on slot antennas. He's written articles on QST magazine. In fact, he's even won several awards. In fact, congratulations on your most recent February plaque that you got.
Yeah, indeed. I'm looking at the wall up there. There are 6 of them.
Wow, good for you.
Out of 29 articles.
And what was this last one about?
The last one was a popular topic on making balance out of coax or coaxial ugly balance, and just the actual math to how to do it for yourself rather than just winding a bunch of wire. So if you want to do that sometime, we can do that one. That's been quite popular.
I'd love to have a session on SWR. We talked about that this morning in our audio cafe cast.
Indeed.
That would be a fascinating, deep subject that most of us hams really don't understand very well. Well, let's get right into your presentation. You have experimented and played around with slot antennas, which I never heard of till I ran across you. Slot antennas and the magic of the things you can do with little to nothing to have a workable VHF, UHF, or 6-meter antenna. So why don't you go ahead and take over the stage here, bring up your presentation, and give us your presentation on slot antennas.
Okay, before I do, I have to put on my training cap.
Very good.
This is an actual official railroad conductor's hat, by the way, which I bought at the Railway Museum in Sacramento. But I want to show you the front of it here. I'll bring it up here so you can see it. Oops. See what it says?
Insulator.
It says insulator. I figured since this is electronic, if there's a conductor, there's bound to be an insulator somewhere. So I'm not a conductor, I'm an insulator.
Nice object lesson.
Okay, there we go. All right. Well, slot antennas. Many hams know about them, but they don't know about them. I knew about them a long time before I ever made a practical one. Because slot antennas, as I have presented this presentation quite a few times now, and by the way, the QR code in the bottom right is my email address in case you want to make note of it that way. Slot antennas are, to most hams, totally undiscovered country. They don't know how to make them. Then there's certainly no place you can go to buy one of them. can't go to your local HRO outlet and order one. Why? Because they're very practical antennas, and yet they don't seem to have made their way into ham radio, and I think we'll see why. The slot antenna, and if you've seen this, that's fine. I'll get to some stuff you haven't seen. The slot antenna was introduced to the radio world. It was known of before then, but it was really made popular in 1938, year I was born, by this fella, Alan Blumlein, who was working for EMI in England at the time. And he pointed out that the slot antenna in its normal configuration, if it's vertical, physically, is horizontally polarized. Or if it's horizontal, it's vertically polarized. Anyway, but a television broadcasting antenna like this big tower on top of Twin Peaks in San Francisco called the Mount Sutro TV tower, which has 3 slot antennas on top of it. They need an omnidirectional antenna, which meant a vertical, but they needed it to be horizontally polarized because that's what the standard for television was accepted to be back in the early days. And the slot antenna was pretty much the only antenna that would do it for them. Hence, slot antennas have been the mainstay of television broadcasting. Even now, when they've gone to UHF, they still use slots. I knew about slots, most hams do. I knew that they were used on microwaves. And in fact, even the tail of the Concorde and various other airplanes had slot antennas, mostly for their VHF communications, talking to the tower and so forth. But nobody knew how they worked. And in 1938, when this slot first came to popularity among the TV business, hams didn't think much about it. They didn't have any interest in a VHF antenna anyway, because who was on VHF in 1938? If you were a real experimenter, you might have been able to do it, but most hams are all on HF in 1938. So the slot got no interest. And part of the reason is, this is the image that most people have when they think about a slot antenna. A great big metal sheet with a little thin slot cut in it. Well, what I did is I scaled the standard slot, the classical slot here, up to 40 meters. Here's what a classical slot would look like if you tried to put it on top of your house for a 40-meter antenna. Not too practical, is it? 70 by 105 feet. No wonder hams didn't get interested in slots. But this is by no means the only form of the slot antenna. We're going to see how to make it practical on HF so that you don't have to put this big sheet of metal on your roof. I got interested in slot antennas, as many of you will know, when I was driving down the street one day and I saw a DirecTV dish on top of somebody's house. I was sitting at a stoplight and I thought, gee, wouldn't it be great? I live in a very restricted mobile home park where they don't permit antennas except satellite dishes. And I thought, boy, if I could just put my 2-meter antenna, a 2-meter base station in that antenna, nobody would know it was there. But I thought, how can you do that? That antenna, that DirecTV dish is all metal. It would interfere with my 2-meter antenna. And I thought, don't be stupid. Use the antenna, use the metal, make use of it, and cut a slot in the reflector of the TV dish. Well, hundreds of these have been made ever since. Here's a kind of a drawing of the what it would look like in the reflector. It's a horizontal slot with drooped ends. And I was able to make this thing work. Not easily, but I got it to work eventually, and it worked very well and has been very popular. And I still get mail on it. But I didn't know how slots worked. So here I am going with my trusty MFJ 259B antenna analyzer, though I've gone to a more elaborate one since, with some aluminum foil tape on a big piece of box cardboard. And I was investigating, how wide do you make the slot? Does it have to be thin like that, or can it be wider, or how wide? Does it work better if it's wide, and what? How about the aluminum foil or the plane of the antenna? Does that have to be big and flat like this? And how wide does it have to be for the slot to be good? And so forth. I've made lots of, by the way, slot antennas with aluminum foil tape. You can buy it at the local 99-cent store or dollar store, and for taping up ducts, or you can find it at a hardware store easily. So I experimented a lot and finally had to have a number of breakthrough, a number of flashes before I understood how a slot works. The second discovery, after experimenting with those, is I learned that there are very, very few restrictions on the slot itself, how wide it is, or on the plane, the metal surface in which it's cut. It can be, either one of these can be almost any size, and you can get a good slot. Now, here's a diagram out of one of the great radio Bibles by Frederick Terman. Maybe some of you have a copy of it. It's one of those big radio Bibles, or the other one by Jansky. And here's a diagram that you'll typically see in one of those manuals of a slot antenna. And Terman here is showing that a horizontal slot is vertically polarized. Notice the little arrow in the middle with the E on it. That's the electric vector of the wave that comes off the slot. So it's vertically polarized, but it's a horizontal antenna physically, and radiates like it was a horizontal antenna. And there's a vertical one over on the right, like the TV antennas. But I took from Terman here that, well, if you want to make this work right, you have to make that plane 3/4 of a wavelength long and a half a wavelength high. Wrong. Tell them what they didn't win, Johnny, as they say on Jeopardy. So those sizes are not gospel. You can make that plane any width you like it. You can make that the slot width, anything you like it, and it still works fine. And that's important if you want to make slot antennas efficient on all bands. My third discovery, and this is to me the really big one. Many of you may have already heard this, but I still think it's worth repeating. How can a hole, an empty space, a slot with nothing in it, how can that be an antenna? It seems like a mystery. I wondered about this from the very early days when I first thought about trying to make a slot. I didn't know how to do it. How in the world can an empty piece of empty space, a hole, a slot, be an antenna? And if you look further in the handbooks, you'll find a diagram like this one. Here's a classical slot at the bottom and a dipole at the top, which is the same size as the slot. They say that the two of them are an analog or a complement of each other. They're complementary. And indeed they are. That dipole at the top and that slot at the bottom both radiate pretty much in the same way, except for the polarization. And that's caused simply by the way they're fed. You'll see the dipole is fed in series and the slot is fed in parallel. But that didn't explain to me yet why that hole can act like that real antenna up at the top. How does an empty space act as a dipole? But it does. And if you read further to try to find out how that is, you'll come up with this very impressive looking French physicist of the late 19th century, Jacques Babnet. He said that a hole or a solid object will refract an electromagnetic wave in the same way, but except for the polarization. But does that explain anything? Did that tell me how it works? No, I still didn't know how a hole could be an antenna. Here's the diagram that does explain it. Look in the middle. What kind of an antenna is that? Ah, there's an antenna you recognize, a folded dipole. All hams know what a folded dipole is. It's a one wavelength piece of wire wrapped around a little narrow space. Look at the slot at the bottom. It's a one wavelength conductor wrapped around an empty space, in fact, the same size. But also look at the one at the top. Many of you will recognize that. That's one loop out of a cubical quad. Many of you know what cubical quads are. You may have even owned one. That's the same antenna. It's just an empty space with a conductor around the outside, one wavelength long. They're all the same antenna. Slots and quads are all folded dipoles. The only difference is how they're fed. Now, let's look at that for a second. How do you get a cubical quad at the top to be horizontally polarized? Why, you make the break at the bottom, or at the top if you wanted to. You feed it at the bottom by opening it up there. That'll make it horizontally polarized. How do you make it vertically polarized if you want it to be that way? Then make the break in the loop at the side, and it'll be vertically polarized. The same is true for a folded dipole. If you want a folded dipole to be horizontally polarized as a horizontal antenna, make the break in the loop in the middle of the bottom or the top. If you want it to be vertically polarized, make the break at the ends. Well, that's what a slot does. It's hard to cut a slot and break it and feed it as in series. But so slots are typically shunt fed, like shown at the bottom. And when you do that, the polarization is vertical. So remember, a horizontal slot is vertically polarized. A vertical slot is horizontally polarized. Very important principle. To prove that how it really works is this diagram. Here's a diagram of a slot antenna, classical slot antenna, showing you the currents flowing on the plane. Notice that the high intensity currents flow right at the edge of the opening. They don't flow in the hole. The hole is not an antenna. It's an insulator. It's empty space. It can't be an antenna. It's the metal plane that's the antenna right at the edge. That's why the slot works. Okay, fourth discovery. Can you bend the slot or the plane, or does it have to be flat? But do both of them have to be flat and in the same plane and straight? The answer is no, they do not. Here's my first slot that wasn't all in the same plane. It's a staggered slot. It's still flat in this case. This one is made out of 2-inch aluminum sticky tape that's stuck on the sliding glass window door going out onto my patio. And you notice it's a slot antenna. It's half a wavelength long. If you follow the length up and down, it's a half a wavelength long. And it's shunt fed at the left there where it says SWR. The feed line comes up there through the balun, which it needs, and you connect it shunt across it. Tuning at the other end is simply done by moving another piece of tape in or out to shorten or lengthen the antenna. That's how you change the frequency of a dipole, just shorten or lengthen it. Here's the most fun slot I ever built. This is a Lincoln hat made out of flashing aluminum, which you can buy at any hardware store. And I cut a staggered folded slot. This slot is not only staggered, it's also rolled into a cylinder. And right under it, by the way, is a shield so that my brain doesn't get fried when I use it. And I wear this one at swap meets and other things and parades and stuff, and this gets a lot of attention. But on top of my head, it's a very efficient antenna, and hooked up to my HT, the HT works a great deal better. Now, here's another slot that proves that the slot and the plane do not have to be flat and in the same plane. This is a perfectly functional slot antenna. The article ran, if you want to make note of it, in case you're an RVer and you might want to make one of these, the article ran in March 2018 QST, and I won the antenna design competition for 2018 with this particular antenna. It's a slot. It's that space where the green arrows are between those two metal sheets, which are about 16 inches on a side, square aluminum sheets. And the metal post at the edge where the arrows are pointing to is the end of the slot. So it's a slot antenna, classical slot. These posts in front are made of fiberglass. They're insulating. And you can see the feed point shunting it at the end over there by the feed line. This is a great antenna if you're an RVer. If you have an RV and you're tired of knocking 2-meter antennas off of the top of it on tree limbs, build one of these. They can go on a smooth side plastic RV or they can go on a metal RV and they work just as well because it's a full ground independent half wave antenna. Doesn't care whether it has a ground plane or not, whereas a 19-inch spike does. So this is a great RV antenna. That's what I built it for originally. Here you see it on top of my pickup truck, held on by 4 magnets, 4 cup magnets, which hold it on very well. I've driven down the freeway above the legal limit and it stays on fine. Fifth discovery. Does the plane have to be wide? Does the metal surrounding the slot have to be wide? Or can it be very narrow? And the answer is yes, it can. Here's how I found out. This is an antenna you'll find on the internet commonly. It's called a hentenna. Developed by 2 or 3 Japanese hams back in the 1970s for 6 meters. And hen has some meaning in Japanese. I don't know what it is. And as you can see, it's a folded dipole or a slot. It's a skeleton slot, meaning that the plane, the metal conducting surface, is very small. It's just a skeleton. And they found that it's best about 3 to 1 in width, and that's correct. Skeleton slots are best at a width to height ratio of about 3 to 1. So here is the hentenna shown vertically. And you can see the parallel feed down there, which makes it horizontally polarized. A lot of people on 6 meters like to be horizontally polarized, just like the TV broadcasters like to be. If you want to make it for 2 meters, you can turn it sideways and then it'll be vertically polarized. And it's made out of one of ham radio's most favorite construction materials, 1/2-inch copper pipe, just like the infamous copper pipe J-pole. Well, after I had made this, I realized, experimenting with slots, that I don't have to make it flat like the Japanese made it there in the hentenna. Why not fold it up like this guy? That's just a hentenna. That's just a 2-meter hentenna, horizontal hentenna, folded into a cube. That antenna is only 11 inches high and 11 inches on side. And yet it has the performance of a 6-foot-tall copper J-pole, the most infamous of all homebrew ham antennas. It works just as well. Also notice the ballon, which is just a coax ballon wound around the PVC mount pipe. And the feed point there is the shunt feed at one end. Here's one of my best email pictures that I got back from a builder who was really happy with his slot cube. You might wonder, how does that slot cube work? Well, here's the performance data from EasyNext. The red curves are for a J-pole, the standard 5-foot-tall, 1/2-inch copper pipe J-pole that many, many hams have built. The blue curve is for the slot cube. You can see that it's every width the equal of a J-pole. But let me ask you this. Which one of these is your neighbor going to notice? Which one of these is your homeowners association going to notice? Which one of these can you put up in your attic and lose it entirely? This one, the slot cube. Well, as happens every time I write a 2-meter article, somebody says, but can you make it for 6 meters? And some of them did. Some of them just took that slot cube and enlarged it by 3 times. But it was pretty heavy and pretty difficult to mount. So I decided to try to make a 6-meter slot cube using those principles that you can fold and stagger a slot. So here's a hentenna, a 2-meter hentenna on the left, vertically polarized because it's a horizontal hentenna. It's 103 inches long. But fold it into a slot cube and you get a nice little cube that's only 25 inches on the side. Still pretty big. But what happens if you just stagger the slot, as you do there on the right, and put some little verticals in there so that the slot staggers up and down? Now you've got a slot cube for 6 meters equal to a full-size J-pole that's only 15 inches cubical. Here's a picture of it. This won me a cover plaque award, and well, so did the 2-meter cube back some months ago. And there's the 2-meter cube on the left, and it's 6-meter equivalent, but this one is staggered. the little vertical pipe sticking down cause the slot to stagger up and down, goes up and down, up and down, up and down around till it comes to the other end. And it has 2 sliding bars on it. The one where you move it up and down to adjust the SWR, and the one you move it up and down to change the tuning. The 2-meter one was fixed tune, but it always ended up where it belonged anyway. This is a 6-meter version. Now, discovery number 6, and this is important if you want to get slots to work on HF. Not all parts of an antenna radiate. Well, what do you mean? It's an antenna. I thought all of it radiated. Oh, no. No antenna radiates the same way from all parts. All antennas radiate more from one part than another, including Yankees and dipoles and inverted Vs and any kind of an antenna. You might think your inverted V radiates equally. No, it doesn't. Radiates up at the top near the feed point. The bottom ends don't radiate at all. Let me prove that to you. I love EasyNet, the modeling software. If you want to design antennas, you got to get used to some form of NEC, NEC, numeric electronic code modeling software to model antennas before you try to build one. Well, I love EasyNet. It's a good one. EasyNet has a nice feature. It's called current and phase display. If you turn it on, your model, and there's the model, and the EasyNet model in the middle, it'll draw these purple lines on your model and show you where the current is. And it shows you the strength of the current by how far the purple line is away from the black line in your model. And the phase is shown to you, the phase of the current is shown to you by which side of the black line it's on. Notice the J-pole. Up at the top, where there's just a half-wave dipole, vertical dipole, there's no opposition of the current. But look at the bottom, where the current, as you can see, is equal and opposite. What happens when the current in nearby conductors are equal and opposite? They don't radiate. It's the same reason open wire feed line does not radiate. The currents in it are equal and opposite. That little bottom thing is just a piece of open wire transmission line. It's just a matching stub. The bottom of a J-pole does not radiate. A very important principle. I use it and I test all my new antennas this way to see where the energy is coming from. All right, we got all those principles and we're going to combine them now to make a practical slot for HF. It's an antenna that I call the double delta inverted skeleton slot antenna. And it has 4 major benefits over any other vertical. It's a vertical antenna, and hams like verticals. And they like verticals for the number 2 reason here, low angle radiation. This is a vertical, it has low angle radiation, but it's a vertical that's horizontally polarized. Why is that important? Well, verticals, which are vertically polarized, pick up a lot of noise. Horizontal antennas are at least 3 dB better in not picking up man-made noise and lightning strokes and all that other stuff. So this is a vertical that's horizontally polarized. And because of radiation cancellation, as I showed you in the previous slides, the elevation that where this antenna radiates is right up at the top. Therefore, it works well sitting right on the ground at the bottom. It's a good antenna. And this is what the double delta inverted skeleton slot does. Good high radiator, low angle radiation, horizontally polarized. And number 4, it has gain. Here you can see the bottom currents in the antenna. Notice that the bottom currents in the double in one of the delta loops they cancel out. Therefore, there's no radiation coming off the bottom of this. Where does the radiation coming for? Just like in the J-pole, only from the top. And what direction is the current flowing? Horizontally. It's horizontally polarized. Low noise. High rate radiation from high up. Better for ground losses. So that's one of the loops of the double delta skeleton slot. Now I want to show you this slide because a lot of people do this and it's bad. Here's somebody who's decided to hang a delta loop off of his tower by running it down from the tower and feeding it at the bottom. This is the wrong way to do it. Why? You should be able to answer why it's the wrong way now. Why is it? What part of that loop is radiating? The bottom of that loop, not the top, not the middle, but the bottom. We saw it there in the previous slide. Don't mount deltas with the point upward. Mount deltas with the point downward. Then you'll make it really work right. This is the wrong way to do it. All he had to do was put a fiberglass cross arm up there at the top and run and make the delta inverted, and it would have been a much better antenna. But the fourth major advantage of the double delta inverted skeleton slot is it has azimuth gain. Okay, what vertical do you know of that has gain towards the horizon? Most verticals send their signal omnidirectionally in all directions. What vertical will send its energy more in one direction than another? Well, no vertical that I know of except this one. It has azimuth gain. Let me show you that. Here's a 30-foot inverted delta loop. It's a 14 gauge wire in a delta loop, shunt fed at the end. And here is its radiation pattern. Looking down at the top of the antenna will be right in the middle. If you're looking down at the top of it, it has a soft donut-shaped radiation pattern. It's perpendicular to the plane of the loop. The loop would be vertically here, in this case, right across the middle of that radiation pattern. And notice that the outside scaling on this is 5 dBi. What's the gain of a vertical quarter wave or vertical half wave dipole? 2.1 dBi. This antenna has on every band except 80 meters, where it's equal to a dipole, has more than that gain. On 40 meters, it's got 2 or 3 dB more. 20 meters, it's got about 4 dB more. And on 10 meters, this antenna has about 7 dB more gain than a vertical dipole. That's almost as good as a beam. And it has the polarization of a beam. Now I ask you, which one of these is your neighbor going to look at and say, get rid of that ugly antenna? Here is mine. It's in my backyard. And as you notice, I live in a small mobile home. And this is all the backyard I've got. There it is. And there's my double inverted delta loop. And I used to run it with an auto tuner, but I don't now. Under that Rubbermaid bucket there is a manual tuner. I just go out and reset the dial to the marks I made on the front of it. And it's easy to change bands that way. And a common antenna tuner does not cost the price of an auto tuner. Although you can use the auto tuner if you can still get one. They're getting harder to get. But don't try to feed this antenna with a tuner in your shack. Do not do that. Why? Because the high SWR that you'll get in the coax will eat you alive. And if you try to run it with the auto tuner in your rig, you might blow the auto tuner up. Don't do that. The auto tuner or the manual tuner has to be at the base. You have to match this antenna at the base. This one stands in a 4-foot soil pipe buried 4 feet in the ground. And by the way, you don't need concrete to put a pipe in the ground to hold up an antenna. The soil holds it just fine. And here's mine, and it has no guys. It's an aluminum pole that's telescopic. It's 5 6-foot sections of tapering aluminum pole held up with hose clamps. Here's the top of it. The middle of it is a 3D printed block to hook together 4 fiberglass 1/2-inch poles or tubes. I'll show you where to get these in a minute. They're easy to get. And there are the 2 loops. You can see them. They're 14 gauge stranded common house wire. And they cross over in a little loop at the top there at the middle. Be sure they stay apart because they might arc. And if you want the STL file to print this, if you have a 3D printer or know somebody that does, I'll be glad to send it to you. I'll show you my email address at the end. Here's what this antenna looks like collapsed. Those 5 6-foot sections or 5 6-foot sections of tapering aluminum pipe easily telescope down and drop down if you loosen up the hose clamps and let it slip down. And there it is, all folded down with the little arms, the fiberglass arms all tilted down on the wire. That thing weighs about 8 or 9 pounds or 10 pounds. I can easily put that thing up. And I'm 82, and so you can't use the age excuse. I can go out and put this in the ground and have it erected in about 10 minutes. In the middle there, you see the auto tuner that I was using for a while. That's an LDG RT600. Highly recommend that tuner if you can still get one. And then there's a little box there above it, which is a reversing relay. If you use a double pole, double throw relay and drive it with 12 volts from that black cable from your shack, you can turn the direction of this antenna 90 degrees. That way you get good steering and you can aim it pretty much where you want to. And this is a great portable antenna for field day, or a good permanent antenna, or one that if you don't want to put it up all the time, you can take it down real easily and the neighbors won't even notice it. Although my neighbors don't notice it anyway. It's been up for a year. Nobody said anything. Here's where you get the material. Go to DX Engineering. I'm sure most of you heard of them. And they sell lightweight aluminum antenna tubing in all diameters from quite small up to quite large. And this antenna is made of five sections of 6 feet with a 1 foot overlap as I push them up. Tapers from 1 3/8 at the top to 2 inches at the bottom. Make it taller if you want, because with an auto tuner or a manual tuner at the base, it can be any height you want it to be. Now, a further possibility, instead of using the antenna tuner, the auto tuner at the base, which you must have, you must match this antenna at the base, not from your shack with a tuner. That's a no-no. Another possibility would be to make yourself a little sealed box out there with a place you could plug in some coils and capacitors if you wanted to. Just go outside there and plug in a coil and capacitor L-match combination to make this loop, this double inverted delta tune up. And here's another way you can do it. That's a little simple variable L match that I made. It's just an L and a C. It's an L match, and I tuned it up on low power on all bands, and then I marked the face. Put some marks on that plastic face over there. So to change bands, all I do is step outside, turn the crank to the right number of turns, put the little arrow pointer at the right amount of capacity, and the thing is matched. Then I can go back into my shack and touch it up if I want to with the tuner in my rig, and that works perfectly. That's a $50 item maybe as compared to a $500 item for a remote auto tuner. The remote auto tuner is handy as heck. It's automatic, push the button, it does the job. But the remote auto tuner manufacturers are not manufacturing them anymore. And here, if you want to know a little more about this one, is a shameless commercial for my Amazon Kindle ebook. If you want to get a copy of it, many people have purchased it, and that little QR code at the bottom will tell you how to get to it. Well, anyway, just go to Amazon.com, search for slot antennas for ham radio. It'll come right up. That little QR code up there at the left is my email address, which is there below it, jportune@aol.com, or you can reach me through my website, W6NBC.com.